I want to start by telling you why a rabbi am doing an episode on anti-Muslim hatred instead of a Muslim scholar, an imam, or someone who lives the Islamic life. Because Jewish ethics doesn't let me sit this one out. The Torah commands 36 times more than any other commandment. You shall not oppress the stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. It doesn't say, defend your own people. It says, defend the stranger, the one who isn't you. So tonight isn't me speaking for Muslims. It's me speaking because of what my own tradition demands when I watch a community get demonized in the language of, they're different, they're dangerous, they don't belong here. Because as Jews, we've heard every one of those sentences aimed at us over and over again. Now, I'm not getting every nuance of Muslim experience right tonight. I'm a guest in this conversation. But silence isn't an option that Judaism gives me. I'd rather say something and show up than say nothing by being quiet. Being quiet is acquiescing to the charges, to the to the hate. This didn't start on 9/11. Anti-Muslim didn't start then. People think that anti-Muslim, it's a 21st century phenomena. It's closer to 1,000 years old, and it has a very clear history, a very clear shape. It started with the Crusades, the enemy. See, beginning with the First Crusade in 1095, the Catholic Church framed Muslims not as a different faith to be debated, but as a race hostile to God. That was language used by the Pope himself. Sermons and chronicles cast Muslims as violent infidels deserving conquest. This wasn't about theology. It wasn't even about a conversation. It was about justifying war by making the other side less human first. Now, this is the same as European Christendom made against the Jews in the same centuries. The blood libel, the Crusades, detours into massacring Jewish communities. Same playbook, just a different target. Scholars gave this era a name, Orientalism. European empires didn't just conquer Muslim-majority lands, they built an entire intellectual tradition that portrayed Islamic civilization as exotic, backward, incapable of governing itself. That portrayal wasn't neutral scholarship. It was the moral justification for an empire. We're not colonizing you, we're civilizing you. You're primitive. This is the era that produced the stock images still circulating today. The despot, the harem, the savage. None of this was descriptive. It was just strategic. Now, after September 11th, a new charge emerged. Distinct from your inferior, you're a threat hiding in plain sight. Surveillance programs, watch lists, travel bans, an entire security apparatus built on the premise that Muslim identity itself is a risk factor. And it's here where I have to bring you current, because this isn't history, it's this year. The Council on American Islamic Relations document the highest number of anti-Muslim civil rights complaints in its 30-year history. Over 8,000 complaints. Another record year with documented rise to crackdowns, legislation specifically targeting Islam. There was a federal bill that would restrict courts from recognizing anything connected to Islamic law. A gubernatorial campaign in Texas was built around banning Sharia, and a sitting director of national intelligence citing 2 American cities as supposed examples of Sharia expansion, claims that were factually false. We're not talking about ancient history now, we're talking about now. I also want to say something carefully, because I know in the past few years have seen anti-Muslim, anti-Palestinian sentiment arising alongside real serious increases in anti-Semitism. Often the same political movement, sometimes the same people. And yes, you can hold both of those facts as true without canceling one or the other. I'm not trying to rank whose suffering counts more or less. I do not work with my own community elsewhere. Tonight, I'm doing it for someone else. Now, why does the suspicion sticks? There are three mechanisms. Same principle as always. When a hatred this old and this widespread persists, the explanation isn't about the target group. It's about what the hatred does for the people holding it. We start off with the same single story. If the only Muslims most non-Muslims ever see in the media are terrorists, oppressed women, background extras in war coverage, the brain builds a category, stops updating it. It's psychology calls it fixed thinking. We judge how common something is by how easily examples come to mind. The media coverage makes violent extremism disproportionately easy to recall, even though the majority of Muslims will never encounter terrorism in their own lives any more than the majority of any other group will. One terrible act gets treated as representative. A mass shooting by a non-Muslim gets treated, oh, that was an individual that did it. The asymmetry isn't an accident. It's a mechanism. Here's the test I'd ask everyone watching to apply. Honestly, do you hold any other faith's billion-plus adherents responsible for the actions of its most violent fringe? Catholics aren't asked to answer for the IRA. Buddhists aren't asked to answer for ethnic violence in Myanmar carried out in Buddhism's name. Only one group routinely gets handed a collective indictment committed by a small fraction of its members thousands of miles away, and who they never met, and they condemn them just as much. It's a double standard. The most modern piece, and it's structural, is after 9/11, Muslims' identity itself got folded into national security infrastructure, watch lists, airport screening protocols, surveillance programs that treated mosques as monitoring targets rather than what they were, houses of worship. It's been documented, leaked federal watch list data that is entirely composed of Arabic and Muslims' names. When a government apparatus encodes suspicion into its own system, it just doesn't reflect public prejudice. It manufactures and legitimizes more of it. Ordinary people absorb the message. If the state treats this group as a risky category, oh no, I have to be reasonable. Now, terrorism is true. But the minute you scale up to 1.8 billion people, the act of a one or two extremists, something's awry. You're creating hate. I want to do something a little different now in this section. I'm going to put Jewish text and Islamic text side by side because they say the same thing, and it's worth listening. As I mentioned, 36 repetitions of "do not oppress the stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt." The rabbis ask, why is this commandment needed so many times? Because it's the one we're most likely to violate when we get frightened. And our own history of being the suspect, the outsider, the different one. It's supposed to create empathy, for people standing in that position. Not hardened heart, not a sense of, oh, it's someone else's turn, good. Islam. The Quran says in Surah 49:13 that God made humanity into different nations and tribes specifically so that you may know one another, and that the only real measure of nobility is righteousness, not tribe, not bloodline. And there is a teaching attributed to the Prophet Muhammad in the Hadith that I think is the single most useful sentence for tonight. The angel Gabriel kept recommending good treatment of one's neighbor until the Prophet said he thought Gabriel was about to make the neighbor an heir. Islamic scholars are explicit. This obligation towards the neighbor applies to everyone, whether the neighbor is Muslim or not. It's not a kindness reserved for those in the in-group. It's a baseline owed to whoever lives next to you. 150 scholars have said this. In 2007, a document called A Common Word Between Us and You, signed by the 150 Muslim scholars across every major school of Islamic thought, was sent to Christian leaders worldwide, grounding interfaith cooperation and love of God, love of neighbor, and shared scriptural commands. This wasn't a fringe gesture. It was mainstream Muslim intellectual world formally saying, our text demands this too. When I hear they hate us, it's in their religion, and it's people. I've heard that about Muslims. I hear an echo of every sentence ever used against my people. Oh, their laws are different. They never really belong. You can't trust what's underneath. The accusation is structurally identical. Remember, the target has changed. Every scripture has bad, including mine, verses that weaponize out of context. The question is not what the question is, what do the tradition seriously scholar say? It's not what the worst faith reading produces. Stop cherry picking, stop picking verses and saying, oh, this says that. No. And I've done episodes on that as well. So why do people hate Muslims? Let me answer it straight out. People feared Muslims because they were theologically different the other. Then because the empire needed them to be primitive. Then because an attack by a tiny number of extremists got generalized over 1 billion people who had nothing to do with it. The accusations kept restructuring itself to fit whatever fear was dominant, which tells you, like, the accusation was really not about facts. It was about a target. Now, I'm not asking you to adopt a religion that isn't yours. I'm asking you to apply the same standard you want to apply to your own group. Judge people by what they actually do, not by the worst thing that one minority person has done. My tradition says 36 times, do not oppress the stranger. Tonight, the stranger is someone else's community, and that commandment doesn't have an exception clause for that. Rabbi Block at hotmail.com. Feel free to email me if you'd like to discuss or contradict, or, hey, we could do a show together, and you want to present the Muslim or the Jew as the enemy? Email me, and we'll do that show together. Thank you for watching, and thank you for listening.